Well, the Chicago Cubs are exactly where we thought they would be before we hit the beginning of the season. The Cincinnati Reds, on the other hand, not so much.
You are Locked On MLB Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this Locked On MLB crossover. My name is Jeff Carr. I am one half of Locked On Reds. His name is Matt Cozzi. He is one half of Locked On Cubs, and we both host daily shows about your favorite teams, whether they are the Reds or the Cubs. Both, we don't judge. It's not how we do this around here. We're glad that you're alongside us here today. We are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And on today's podcast, we're going to look at what these two teams are staring at moving forward. Both clubs are not going to face each other for the next 2 months. So that's going to be interesting to see how the things change in between now and then. We'll discuss that here a little bit later on in the show. We are entering into trade deadline rumor season, though, and there's lots to talk about where the Cubs and the Reds are concerned, especially because the Reds sort of seem to be towing that line between buyer and seller. We'll discuss that here in just a few minutes, but I want to begin today's show with why the Cubs they did exactly what they were hoping to do, and they completely just smashed Reds fans' hopes. Because to be quite honest with you, Matt, like coming into this series, coming into the 6 games, I mean, it was 6 games in 9 days. It was kind of crazy. But coming into these 6 games, I'm like, go 500. If you can go 500, then you can continue to believe that at some point you'll get back into this division race. But the Reds go 2-4 in this series. The Cubs handily win both times in Cincinnati and in Chicago. And it really feels like the NL Central is going through Chicago, and I'm not necessarily sure that the Reds bandwagon is going to be making it there anytime soon.
Yeah, Jeff, good to be with you. Glad we're doing this crossover. I feel the same way, and I thought that was one of my larger takeaways from last weekend, and going 4-2 now overall over the 2 weekends, I think solidifies that notion even more. Teams are chasing down the Cubs this year. We'll see how big of a lead they can get out to. But given where both teams were at entering last Friday, I thought the Cubs going 4-2, and I know I'm a little more conservative in nature. I thought that did loom large. Yes. I respect the Reds. I respect their pitching, especially their young offensive core. And I thought going 4-2, winning both series was big. I really do. I understand the Cardinals have been a pest. The Brewers are hot right now. But if I were to look at the teams trailing the Cubs and say, hey, who strikes fear a little bit more than the others? For me, it is the Reds. And so to go 4-2 as we sit here and record on June 1st, and for the Cubs to build out a little bit of their lead with the Cardinals losing this weekend as well. They're in a good spot right now after these division games.
I find it interesting because I was going to ask you about that, like who you kind of look at as the biggest worry within the division, because before these 6 games began, I thought, okay, the Reds pitching is better than the Cubs pitching, but the Cubs lineup is better than the Reds lineup. And it was clear through these 6 games that the Cubs, the gap between the lineups and the gap is much bigger than the gap between the pitching staffs. And that's really what the difference was in this, because there were some games where the Reds pitching staff did its job, did what they were supposed to do. And the lineup did not follow suit, especially in Chicago in game 2 on Saturday. I mean, the Reds got 2 guys on base. Like, you're never going to beat anybody if you only get 2 guys on base. That's just not going to happen. And Ben Brown was shutting them down with that knuckle curve. And, you had Palencia really shut it down in the 9th inning. His 2-seamer, man, that sinker that he's got just looks ridiculous. But there's too many guys in this Reds lineup right now that are infuriatingly bad. And not because they themselves are bad, but because I know they can be better. And Matt McClain being the absolute first guy that I think of here, I know that he's better than this. But as you guys saw, dude's swinging at a pitch that's coming plateward right now, and it's really kind of hurting this entire lineup as a whole because he was supposed to be the guy in that 2-hole. And then Terry Francona decided that Santiago Espinal was the answer because Matt McClain was struggling. That's just not happening. But ultimately, it just seemed as though if the Cubs got out by multiple runs in a lead, the game was over.
Yeah, and I feel like for a lot of our discussions, sometimes we do try to hit all the points, but with the Reds, I think it comes down to one simple thing, and let me know if I'm wrong. They've been shut out 9 times.
Yeah.
And that adds up because then how many games they're scoring 1 or 2 or 3? How do they do, in extra innings, things like that, where it's just so close. And for us entering the season as Cubs fans, the Cubs right now are really dissipating some of these qualms that we had in terms of being on the margins and keeping games close, because that was their downfall not only last year but the year prior, in which there was some big games with the Reds as well. And are they going to score like this the whole year? No, but they did just enough offensively this weekend. I think for me, Jeff, the Cubs are getting to a point now when you say they're in the driver's seat. It's true. We're getting to a point where, like, Friday's loss, there's no reason to fret over it. That's baseball.
Right.
You're
not going to sweep every series, but
we got cooped up in that the last 2 years because it was just, rung by rung, inch by inch, building these big holes, trying to dig out. You don't do enough. And this year they're doing enough and then some.
I think the biggest thing too, like as I watch this series unfold, it's clear to me the Cubs don't have to play perfect baseball to win a game. Like,
wow,
if they don't have all facets of the game working for them, they can figure it out. Like if the starting pitching doesn't happen, the lineup's going to pick them up. And if the bullpen isn't there, they've got the fielding that can catch it behind them and all this other stuff. And the Reds have to play perfect baseball. Everything has to work for them to get a win right now, because if they're not hitting, they cannot, their bullpen doesn't seem to be able to hold on enough. And by not hitting, obviously getting shut out doesn't matter how good a pitching you got. You're never going to win those games. But at the same time, if they're giving up 1 or 2 runs, that Saturday game just sticks in my craw, man, because if you can hold the Cubs line up to 2 runs, you better win that game. And they didn't, because they just could not get anything going with the bat. And I think that for me, that's the biggest problem right now, is that I'm not sure how the Reds make up that gap. And here we are, June 1st, and I'm not saying that the Reds are done, but I'm sure as heck not saying that they're a contender right now either.
Absolutely. And that is a little bit of a surprise from my outside perspective.
It's a bummer, dude. I'm not going to lie.
I don't think the order of operations in the division is something that I visualize right now. I know the Cardinals are catching it and throwing it like crazy, and their defense has been great. Will they be able to score enough? And, just the star power of Green in the rotation, De La Cruz in the lineup. And I'm sure you have concerns about, the expected record versus the real life record, and being a few games short of that. And then, just when you think the season is going well for the Cubs, they add the wrinkle on Saturday to shut down a Reds offense by going with an opener and then turning it to Ben Brown. So as you said earlier, they're really clicking on all cylinders, and they're doing it multiple ways.
I do have an interesting question about Ben Brown when it relates to what the Cubs' plan is moving forward this season. I also want to discuss the line of buyer and seller and what this expanded wild card race really does for that. We'll do that coming up next. Watching baseball, it's a hungry man's game, and Wonderful Pistachios are going to help you win that game. This is the best snack. I'm gonna tell you what, this tastes amazing. This is the no shells variety, the smoky barbecue. You absolutely get the wonderful barbecue flavor, the well-seasoned no-shell pistachios. They also have all these other great flavors on the no-shells, like salt and vinegar. They got salt roasted. They got chili roasted, jalapeno lime. So many mouth-watering flavors, but my favorite has been this smoky barbecue. You will completely forget the fact that these are actually really good for you. Like 1 ounce servings have 11% of your daily value of protein. That's wonderful pistachios. They are going to replace those unhealthy for you snacks that kind of are your Achilles heel, and they're going to strengthen you because they are awesome. Get snacking, get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. That's wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. I got this one from my local grocery store. Recommend you go grab yourself one today. Thanks for always making Locked On Reds and Locked On Cubs part of your everyday routine. If you don't, and if you're not an everydayer, we encourage you, hit that subscribe button here on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting app. We'd love to have you alongside us talking baseball every step of the way. All right, Matt. So coming into this month of June now, we're finally getting closer to the actual days of summer. I know that you and I both recognize the fact that it's warm on some days, it's not warm on other days, but that means we're getting close to trade season, man. And it feels like there's definitely, urgency for both clubs to get something done in a couple of different areas. Of course, it helps when the other side of those trade negotiations is also urgent, and that's not happening right now. That's why I've not seen any trades. But I wonder a little bit, and I'll get into Reds being buyers or sellers in just a minute. But I wonder a little bit about Ben Brown and how he really affects the pitching strategy for the Cubs moving forward, because I know that Shota Imanaga's on the IL. I know that Justin Steele's not coming back. So it's obvious that the Cubs would be in the market for a starting pitcher, but does Ben Brown maybe make that a little bit less of a need?
Maybe a little bit. I think in terms of where he would fall in the rotation and contributions in meaningful baseball games, is definitely impacted. I do think, just given mileage on the arm and him missing a lot of time last year, he may still be destined for the bullpen. And guess what? I think he would do pretty well out there, and maybe be even an impactful reliever. Right now, the two names I'm more focused on, just because I can appreciate Ben Brown's upside, is Cade Horton as a rookie. Where does he end up when Imanaga comes back? Does he end up in the pen? Does he end up at AAA Iowa? How many more starts does he really make this year? And Colin Ray, because Colin Ray is about as average and replacement level of a pitcher as you can get. If he's in your rotation the rest of the way, I think that's where there's an impetus of, okay, we got to pick up the phone and call these 5 to 10 teams that are for sure going to sell, because the way that we're starting to dream over here, I don't think Colin Ray is in the rotation. But I think Ben Brown could certainly be there a while. He's been given a long leash already just because of the injuries. And I think the shorter leash actually belongs to Ray.
That knuckle curve that Ben Brown has was just destroying the Reds. It was crazy to watch that pitch. But on the other side of the Colin Ray factor of that all, I think I remember, and I cannot remember the exact numbers, but I know that they were talking a lot about this because Colin Ray faced the Reds in both of these 3-game sets. In his career, he's like horrible against the Reds. The Reds somehow have his number, and he just really hasn't figured out how to make that any better for himself. But outside of facing the Reds this year, he's kind of been serviceable. At least statistically,
for the most part.
But that's interesting. So do you think the starting pitching is the biggest need? Or, I mean, obviously everybody needs a little bit of bullpen help, but are you looking at the top end? Do you think Palencia is the guy, or is that like the bigger need between that or the rotation?
I think, or just even looking at the last 7 to 10 days, starting pitching is the number one need, and it's not close. The Cubs bullpen, which we'll discuss more for Tuesday's episode, ranked first in ERA in May. and talk about a resurgence after, getting some flashbacks to last year in April of this campaign, but that stopped now. They were outstanding this month, and looking at the rotation, especially with Steele not coming back, who knows where Javier Assad is up to? Then some questions with some of these veterans and young guys. I think not only starting rotation, Jeff, but a person that you can put behind Imanaga, that you would acquire him, and it's like, okay, that's game 2. And then Tyone slots in at 3 and Boyd at 4, and it creates a little bit of a domino that way.
Don't call Seattle. I don't want to see Luis Castillo pitching in a Cubs uniform. Just don't.
Yes.
Although they're doing pretty good, so maybe I don't have to worry about it. But I'll say this: when it comes to the Reds, I think they're definitely on that line where buyer, seller, it's a little bit of a difficult answer. And there's cautionary tales on both sides. Like I'm thinking of the Orioles from a couple of years ago when they really had a shot. And honestly, the Reds themselves are a cautionary tale from 2023, where they were in first place on August 2nd, or as late as August 2nd, and then didn't make the playoffs at all because they needed starting pitching that year. They did not go get anybody at the deadline, and that's what happened. They started doing bullpen games. It felt like every 5th day, and that destroyed everything about their pitching staff. So there's definitely a case to be made to be a buyer. And I am still in the camp that I believe the Reds could be that team, because it feels like they've got a couple of things that if they acquire, they could at least make it back into the conversation for the division, but definitely in the conversation for the wild card, because some of the teams in the NL West are starting to fall off a little bit. And the Atlanta Braves, I don't know what they are, but they aren't as good as they have been in years past. So it kind of feels like they're gettable.
Diamondbacks too.
Diamondbacks feel good, and they may be losing Corbin Burns. I know that before we hit record, he left his game early with elbow discomfort, and everybody knows what that means for pitching. So whatever that turns into. But yeah, I'm kind of in the mode that I'm like, I would be okay if they got a little aggressive and they went for it at the deadline, especially since they haven't done that in years past.
In terms of especially on the position side, Jeff, in terms of a rental, how much would Nick Martinez improve the Cubs rotation?
A lot. And I know that you didn't get his best stuff on Sunday, but Nick Martinez has had some really great stretches. And I mean, last year he became an everyday starter in the month of August. And from the month of August through the rest of the season, he had an ERA of like around 2.5, and he had a walks per 9 of like 1.1. Like he just doesn't walk people. He's not the biggest strikeout machine, but he is not going to walk anybody. He is not going to make things harder on himself. He'll give up some hard contact every now and then. It just kind of depends on how people are hitting his off-speed stuff. And I think that's really where the Cubs were getting up on him on Sunday, is that he just couldn't quite locate some of those pitches for the strikes that he really wanted to, and they were able to hit the ones that did hit the strike zone pretty well. But I think overall, Nick Martinez would be the kind of guy that would get you there. Like I kind of think, for some reason, and don't ask me why, but there's a guy that's always stuck in my mind about like deadline acquisitions in a rotation, and Jeff Suppan. I don't know if you remember from like the mid-2000s.
I remember him, yeah.
I think he got traded like 3
good
or 4
old number 37,
deadlines.
I believe.
Yeah, and I think Nick Martinez is a much better version of him, and he was always a very highly sought-after pitcher at the deadline. And with him being on a 1-year deal, the qualifying offer, you don't have to have that long-term commitment.
Yeah. I think the Cubs are going to look for a mixture. I mean, where the Cubs could really get greedy, Jeff, is if they go for a controllable rotation guy and a rental to really solidify that group. And with some of these teams that are losing, especially like the Braves, or we'll see what like the Rangers do.
Right.
There could be some controllable names that are actually more veteran names. You know, typically we think about the younger group being the controllable guys who get dealt, but I wonder about Jacob deGrom. I wonder about Chris Sale, and the Cubs need to be prepared whatever route they go to overpay in that market.
And I always think of this too, because like there's people that are just like, why on earth and how on earth would the Reds and Cubs ever make an in division trade? Well,
Oh,
once upon a time, the Cubs traded Sean Marshall for Travis Wood, and well, that worked out way better for the Cubs than it did for the Reds. But they do it. They do it sometimes.
yeah.
But I know this, Matt. Like with the trade deadline coming up, there's still lots to talk about for both of our ball clubs, and we will be covering that every step of the way on both of our shows. But coming up in just a minute, I want to look at what's ahead for these two ball clubs with the next 2 months in between their next meeting. We'll do that next. If you can't watch either Locked On Reds or Locked On Cubs on YouTube, you can always listen to us on your favorite podcast app. We're seriously on all of them. Whatever it is, go check us out there today. And also check out Locked On MLB Game Night when you're done watching this crossover. Locked On MLB Game Night watches every single game, every single night, so that you don't have to, because quite frankly, I don't think anybody should be expected to do that. Locked On MLB Game Night's got you covered, though. You should check them out. All right, Matt, there's 2 solid months, really 2 months and a couple of days, because it's not going to be until August 4th that these two ball clubs get back together at Wrigley Field. This weird schedule, I definitely want to kind of hash that out here in just a few minutes. But looking ahead, like I know from the Reds' perspective, I have said, and Steve and I have both said this on our podcast, that if the Reds can just hang around 500 until about a week before the All-Star break and then go on a run, because they have a week's worth of 7 games against the Marlins and the Rockies right before the All-Star break. If they can hang around 500 and then maybe go 5-2 in that stretch and go into the break just a couple of games over 500, it feels like this team can still be kind of in that. But man, they are heading into a tough stretch of games. And quite frankly, these next 3 games are against Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, it almost feels as if the life support might get cut off if they lose 2 out of 3 in Milwaukee. So I'm a little bit worried at their immediate future, and I'm a little bit worried at their distant future when it comes to the 2025 season.
That sounds right. And for the Cubs, this next 3 is the conclusion of a 21 game soft stretch, we were calling it, on which they are 14-4. So they have taken care of business. They win 2 out of 3 in DC. They would actually exceed what we all kind of ballparked as the measuring stick, whether it was 14-7, 15-6. Wow, they could to go 16-5 would be pretty incredible.
What's it like to have a team that beats teams under 500? Because the Reds are 500 against teams that are under 500.
Feels good. Feels like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Right. There was some coin flip games against the Rockies, but that's part of the game, I suppose. It did get hairy, especially that middle game of the series and extras. But did you know, Jeff, that when we wake up in 30 days on July 1, we'll be 85 games into the year.
It goes by so fast.
And so this month is so significant, whether you're talking division standing, and chasing, or trying to get out ahead more, trade deadline, whether it's recovering from an injury, and that's almost a de facto acquisition. And it's so wild. Like in a month, we're going to be over halfway through. And,
right.
And so when you talk about winning series being a goal, that really does start to snowball.
It's something that the Reds have not put together. I mean, they just won a series coming into Chicago, taking 2 out of 3. And I've gotten to the point, Matt, where this season has felt so frustrating to this point where you want to say, well, there's still time, but there's definitely not a lot of time left. I mean, the Reds did just play game number 60, so we're talking about the 2020 season now worth of games. at this point, the Reds were 31 and 29 in 2020, and they are the opposite of that right now at 28 yeah, you get it. They're a couple of games under 500. My numbers were all confusing there, but that's really going to be the telltale for me. And I know that this is not an issue, and if anybody is interpreting this as boy, we really got to question Terry Francona. Well, that's what they did with David Bell last year, and they brought in Terry Francona. So no, we're questioning Nick Krall, and Nick Krall's got to make some moves, whether it's at the deadline or it's this offseason. Like, the time is now, and there might even be a conversation that if the Reds miss expectations this year, should he get an offseason to make more moves? The Reds operate differently, and as much as I would love to say that it's completely on merit, there's plenty of evidence to the contrary with this Reds ball club, that over the years it's not been that way. So there's a lot of frustration in Reds country where it seems as though they were headed toward a contending year, and they've been anything but to this point. So can they turn that around? Can the guys on this roster turn that around, or can they go get somebody? It just feels like a lot of, man, what if with this ball club, and they've been that way for a few years now.
Well, and I know you've said on your show and also on X that the Reds aren't just as good as you thought they'd be. Mm-hmm. Is there a line of demarcation this month, or perhaps around the 4th of July, or that you would go, they're out of it?
I would struggle to definitively say that, but I'm starting to get that feeling that it's sooner than later. I definitely think it's probably before the All-Star break.
Okay.
Because even if they're, let's say they're around 500 and they hit that stretch of games with the Rockies and the Marlins that I have circled about 100 different times on the metaphorical calendar in my mind. But if they get to that point and they're 6 or 7 games under 500, and then the little run that they go on against those two teams in those 7 days just gets them back to the 500 line, they can't be going out and being buyers and going crazy about trying to get into the wild card this year, because that would feel a little disingenuous, and you might be damaging what could happen next year with a couple of really awesome dudes like Chase Burns. And I mean, Rhett Lauder's had a really injury-plagued season. He's going to be healthy at some point this year, and he'll be ready to go for next year, I believe, as well. But ultimately, like, there's so much to do with this team where it's like, we want them to win now. But I almost wonder how willing they're going to be to gamble to get that done.
Yeah, and I think what some of the lessons that I've learned covering a team on a daily basis is to wait a little bit longer for that type of proclamation, that type of tone. But I'll tell you what, sitting here right now, looking at the Cubs record, looking at their slate, but now on the other side of the coin, and them being the team that everybody's chasing, you do wonder, 4th of July rolls around, All-Star break rolls around. Not that they would necessarily lock it up by then, but I think Cubs land might be feeling just that much better.
Yeah, I think that there's a point this month that the Cubs may be able to almost not completely ignore the Brewers and the Cardinals, because we know better than that.
Right.
But there's going to be a point where the Cubs can kind of start turning their sights to, all right, Dodgers, Giants,
the seeds, the top seeds, right?
Yeah. Where are we going to fit into this? Are we going to get a first round bye?
Yes.
Are we going to be that number 3 seed?
There's
going to be a point where they can start looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sooner rather than later. I believe that. But yeah, I find it intriguing, though, that the Reds and the Cubs, I mean, it took so long for them to face each other in 2025, and it's going to take a little while again to face each other still. This whole schedule, and I get the idea was to make it so that every team plays every team, the balanced schedule, as it were. I think it's been anything but that.
Jeff, the Cubs don't play the Cardinals until the second to last series this month of June.
Wait, they haven't played the Cardinals yet?
They haven't.
Oh my gosh.
That will be their first meeting. Will be late this month. It's almost inappropriate at that rate.
Is that the oldest rivalry in the national? I think it's the oldest rivalry in the National League. Like,
It's got to
why
be.
on earth
right?
are they waiting so long?
Yeah.
That's silly. Yeah, I wonder if they revisit that. I don't know. I mean, they're
It's just there's
constantly revisiting
clunkiness to the schedule. There's clunkiness.
Yeah.
Like even this week for the Cubs, Jeff, they go to DC, then they pass Philadelphia, go to Detroit, then they go to Philly. Like what? Who made this?
Yeah. Well, and even looking ahead to August, whenever the Reds and Cubs play again, that's going to be after the Speedway Series with the Braves. So the Reds, that is and that is a home game too for the Reds, where they play 2 games against the Braves at Great American. Then on Saturday they play at Bristol Motor Speedway, which is like there in Tennessee, and then they have an off day on Sunday, and they travel to Chicago. And it's like, what are we doing here? This is weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just a couple of.
But the pitch clock is working, though.
Yes.
The pitch clock's working.
Now bring in ABS or the challenge system or whatever, because let's fix that. These umpires, man. We don't have enough time to get into all that. That's a whole nother podcast.
Different show.
Thanks everybody so much for checking out today's Locked On Reds, Locked On Cubs crossover. We hope you check out each show as we go throughout the season, because we got you covered every single day with your Chicago Cubs and Cincinnati Reds content, because we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team, your Cubs and your Reds every single day.